You might want to mention that that in the chat window, I'm assuming everybody can see there's a link to a survey site, and I'll bring it up on my thing too. But if you want to mention it, you can just say that we'll be conducting some surveys during this session, and they can either use their own computers to do it, or they can use it on go to a different device. If you don't want to, I'll mention it. Not a problem.
Okay, I'm just trying to think of where I would fit that in.
Yeah, don't worry. I'll say, because it's my first slide anyway, so I'll put it up there. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I think we have already over 100 already participants.
27.
Yeah, 102.
That's including us.
Good afternoon. I'm Christine Dubrow with VS America. On behalf of my colleagues from VS America and our team from around the world, we'd like to express our sincere gratitude to the A4LE and the partnerships we've enjoyed with so many of you during our history together. The A4LE's vision of a world in which place is a catalyst for inspired learning continues to be the beacon for all of us involved in this transformational organization. And now it's my sincere pleasure to introduce Mr. Prakash Nair. Prakash is a futurist, a visionary architect, and the founding president and CEO of Education Design International. Prakash established EDI as an organization that brings together the best school architecture with research-driven innovation. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Prakash Nair.
Hi, thank you so much, Christine. I'm going to introduce my partner and colleague, Roni Zima Doctori, who's our studio head in Israel, and she's also our principal architect. So I'm very honored to have her here with me today. I'm just, this is a very strange time for us to be doing this. I think we are probably the only couple hundred people who are not glued to a TV watching whatever we've been watching for the past God knows how long. So anyway, maybe this could be a therapeutic in some ways, to get away from all of that and focus on something else, for a change. Anyway, so with that, I'm going to go forward. I just also want to say that obviously workshops like this, if it's done live, it's a completely different sense to that, because people can talk to each other, and we can break out groups and things, and those things make more sense. So this format for 2 hours and 15 minutes where we are talking and you're listening is not going to make sense to us. So we've actually introduced a number of surveys which we'll be asking you to participate in, and not all of them are multiple choice. So you will actually get an opportunity to share your ideas with us, and hopefully then I can share all of that with the whole group subsequently. So we'll do that. But more important and good news for everybody is we are hoping that we can get out of here well before our designated 2 hours and 15 minutes. And we've been given permission to stop this and finish up, whenever we think the time is right. And that probably will be before quitting time. So anyway, with said that, I'm going to start off. So this is the, this is the site that I'm was telling you about. So if anybody can, I mean, you can actually use your own phones, preferably, or you can, there's in the chat window, I also given you a link. This is the place that you'll be taking the surveys at. And so throughout this session, we're going to be asking you some questions and you're going to be answering. So if you have a phone or a tablet or something, then you can keep your Zoom window open and just use the other device to answer the questions that we're going to be asking you. So even though I'm leaving, this is up here. It's also in the chat window. If you want to just click it and use your computer, that's fine too. And then just as soon as you answer the question, come back right back into the Zoom. I'm going to bring up my phone here so that I'll have these. I'll be ready to activate these surveys. Anyway, okay. So now, before we move forward, I'm just going to have Roni.
Somebody texted on the chat that the link is not showing up.
Okay, so basically it's, yeah, so just in that case, just type this in. Ideally, if you're having a problem, just type HTTP, and then go ahead and let me know what. I can just type it in here. 1 second here. Time is not much of an issue for us. You would type in, if necessary, sometimes, and let me. So it's http://polev.com/prakashnair832.
And the survey questions are only going to be available when we ask
Yeah.
the question.
Yeah, when we ask a question, the survey will pop up. So right now, you might just go to a site and it'll say that we're waiting for the survey. Okay, with that, I'm just going to have Roni just talk briefly about learning, because ultimately that's what this is all about. So I'm going to get her started with this.
So the title of this talk is Redesigning School for the Fourth Revolution, Industrial Revolution. And the question we need to ask is, why change? And the answer is, if you look on the screen, the answer is in this blue arrow on the right side of this slide, because you can see that learning is doing fine. Actually, learning is doing better than ever. Learning is anywhere, anytime today, but school learning is not doing so well. And this gap is about, it's a relevancy gap, meaning if we want to keep school relevant, then we need to do something about this, because changes are going to happen in higher frequency, faster and faster in the next 20 years. And we do not want schools to be irrelevant. So the question is, what do we do And the answer is we want to close that gap. We want to narrow down that gap in the means that we have. This talk today is more about design and how we can help close this gap so schools will actually stay relevant for the future. And with that, Prakash, I want to ask you to specify more about the changes and what are going to be their impact on learning in the future on schools.
Well, that's a good question. And I think, to be honest, I wish I had the answer. We really don't. And the reason we don't is that because the changes that are happening at a breakneck speed. And as you can see, the fourth industrial revolution, which is what we said this talk was going to be about, really basically are things that on their own, individually, any one of these things has an opportunity to completely revolutionize things. And taken together, they're going to create a world that is almost unrecognizable just a few years from now. So in that context, of course, we have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose and what would be the meaning of education and what does it look like? So rather than for me to answer that question, I'm going to throw this right back in your lap. So go back to that survey. I'm going to activate the survey now.
When if people are writing that the link is not available, so could you please post that again on the chat?
Yeah, 1 second. Let me do this here.
Go back to the first slide.
Yeah. It should be HTTP, or it could be HTTPS, I guess. Let me cut and paste this and see if it works. What about the...
Okay, some people are saying it works for them. Yes, it's HTTPS.
HTTPS maybe.
Yep.
Try that, but it should not matter. It should still work. Anyway, when we'll see, when we start getting results, then we'll know if it's working or not. So basically the question, yeah, see, at least we're getting a few people answering. So the question was, which of the following will have the greatest impact on school architecture? So as you can see, we have, I picked things that I felt could have an impact, like artificial intelligence, robotics, 3D printing, material science, and energy storage. And obviously, from the perspective of sustainability and green design, energy storage becomes a very big deal. Materials science is exceptionally important because we're literally still building with the same materials we built 200, 300 years ago. So that could be a huge thing. Artificial intelligence, of course, dramatically alters the way architects basically do architecture, because of the data that allows us to make intelligent decisions. All the things that we consider problems in the world of architecture can start to go away with artificial intelligence. We can also build smart buildings. And 3D printing, of course, there's a chance that not too far in the distant future, we might start 3D printing buildings. And that's not that far in the future. So it's important for us to know that our profession, at least as architects, is going to change dramatically, as will education. So moving on. So what do you think is the impact of AI on architecture? So I started to get a little bit into that. So this is an open-ended question. I'm going to go back and write up that question for you. 1 second. Be patient. Yeah. What do you think is the impact of AI on architecture? Very interesting. ideas here. That more parametric design modeling is what I was talking to you about earlier. Yep. Lunchtime. Well, some of us don't care. We are probably at a spot in our lifetimes that we say, well, I can leave it to my kids to worry about that. So as you can see, you guys have a lot of good answers here. If I could just keep this going, because we have a couple hundred people, and I'm pretty sure we'll have a lot of this is a group part. Ideally, to elevate design by reallocating hours spent documenting. That's a great point, because that's the part of. I mean, I'm sure most of you are aware of how just in the traditional architectural design, what we now call concept and schematic design used to be things that we used to do in detailed design. We're showing furniture in schematic design, 3D modeling and things like that, which we usually left into the construction documentation phase. So our profession is certainly changing quite a bit because of this. It also means that a lot of the stuff that we were doing before can be commoditized, meaning that it can be done much less expensively by people less trained than we would have expected in our, at least in my early years as an architect. Historically changed the way our work is done. Well, basically, for those who are not that familiar with AI, it's essentially machine intelligence that, because of the speed and of processing, can begin to mirror human intelligence, but at an exponentially greater speed. So what might have taken a human being months to analyze can be done in seconds by AI. And so that's the massive thing. So it can affect every single industry, every single business. So that's why architecture is not going to be immune from that. Anyway, so this is wonderful. So I'm going to move on, and I want to take a different look at it, because after all, we are A for LE, learning environments. So the next question will be, what do you think is the impact of AI on education? Maybe I have to get out and come back in. Okay.
No, it just took longer for people to come up with an answer this time. I guess it's a tougher question.
Yeah. I mean, personalized is definitely a big part of it. That's what I would think, that we can individualize and personalize education in a way that we have not been able to. So essentially, it will be it'll be the method through which we can finally get away from a mass production model of education. We've always thought that efficiency is the key, and our entire education systems are based on the notion of efficiency, not through personalization. We just assume that efficiency trumps everything else, and so basically the number one thing could be that every child will be able to become good at whatever he or she wants to be good at, truly become self-actualized.
Somebody touched upon job training and the whole change of job market, which is also going to influence education for sure.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Also, directed learning. Siri will be teaching kids. Endless opportunities.
Right.
You guys are optimistic today.
Yeah. Well, the teacher loses a traditional job is a great point, because we are going to be talking about the teacher. And that's an excellent point, because, you can't think about education and not think about teaching and teachers. So we'll be touching upon that as well. That's a great point. Mass customization. It's a good point. If Tesla can customize every car, why should education not be able to be customized for every child? So. Yep, education on demand obviously is already here. So that's not something new. So that's great. And I hope you will all keep thinking about this. And whatever you've shared with me here, we will share back with you guys in an email or something like that. Simulations still coming in, good answers, student directed. We'll look for one more and then we'll start. Changing curriculum, excellent point. And on that note, I'm going to talk a little bit about change tax a little bit and sort of shift gears here. Talking about self-determination theory, because this starts with our basic human needs. Because in a fast changing world, the question always becomes, well, what is constant? I mean, if everything changes every day, how do we even know what to do, right? So I think we can go back to the basics in some ways and say, talk about self-determination theory, which is essentially a very, very fundamental theory which has been around for a long time. And it starts with our basic needs. And essentially what self-determination theory, SDT, says is that all human beings have three fundamental needs, everybody. And one of them is called autonomy. Think about a child who's 2 years old, doesn't want you to help him or her, right? She wants to feed herself, she wants to get up, doesn't want you to help. So the idea is that people from a very, very, very early age, as beyond babies, they want autonomy. They want to be able to self-regulate. They want to be able to do things on their own. So this is absolutely critical. This is a basic human need. We don't want to have to depend on somebody else. So autonomy becomes critical. The second is competence. Each one of us wants to feel that we are good at what we are doing. We want to be as good as we can be. Nobody wants to be average. Nobody wants to be bad at something, right? We all go into task with the hope that we can be good at it. So competence, the need to be good at something is fundamental and a very simple and important human trait. And the third is relatedness. I mean, if we were on our own sitting in a desert island, we wouldn't care about competence. We might care about autonomy, we wouldn't care about competence. So relatedness is the fact that we are all part of a community, whether it's a family, whether it's friends, whether it's pen pals, whatever it is. The idea that we want to be connected with other human beings. And so this is a very important thing. So these are the three key things, autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So I want you to suggest one word in your mind that would describe autonomy. Let me see if I have it there. I'm sorry, I've lost my thing here. Oh, it's already coming in. Oh, great. Yeah. So the reason I'm bringing this up, obviously, is that if SDT is an absolute human commonality, regardless of which part of the world we live in, then as educators and as architects supporting the business of education, we need to be supporting these three components of SDT. So clearly choice and independence, uh, self-control, empowerment is a very, very great word there. Individualism, self-directed. So these are the kinds of things that we are looking for. And the question we have to ask ourselves is very simple. When we design something, whether it's a curriculum or whether it's a building, are we allowing our clients, so to speak, in this case, there'd be students and teachers, the opportunity to practice autonomy? Are they truly autonomous, or are we limiting that? Are we as architects or educators putting something in the way that prevents them, or at least doesn't facilitate their autonomy? So that's the kind of question that we can start to ask ourselves. So this becomes an important element because, as I said, in a fast changing world, we have to look back at the things that are not going to change. And this is one thing that we don't believe will change.
I think it's interesting to see how many different words came into mind, and how all of this is related to so many other things. People wrote here creativity and even mobility, meaning that all of this is connected.
Yeah, exactly. Curiosity, how we in our profession can do that. So I'm going to deactivate and start the next one, which is one word to describe competence, what word comes into your mind when you think about competence?
Mastery.
Well, words like confidence and mastery, ability, skilled. I did see the word mediocre coming in because I'm not sure anybody wants to be mediocre, but maybe it's an effort to overcome mediocrity, perhaps. Okay, so these are good words, but again, the question for us, the reason we are putting this up, obviously, is to say, well, are we designing spaces? Are we designing schools in which people can achieve mastery, in which people can be confident, in which people can be skilled, in which people can leave feeling knowledgeable about whatever they want to do, be able to apply their their learning in a real world situation. Now, let's look at one word to describe relatedness. I mean, it's an interesting word because relatedness means that we all want to be part of something. And the reality is that if schools don't provide that, then children will find that on their own. The reason we have gangs, for example, the reason we have bad uh, sort of connections is because we are not giving our children healthy alternatives. So then they find unhealthy ones. But the need to be connected is universal. So one way or the other, people are going to find ways to find their own community, if you will. And it is also, in a sense, the reason why we have so many divisions, because people feel they need to protect their community against everybody else. So it can be a double-edged sword. If you don't truly understand what that means, you can create an us versus them mentality, which is what happens in schools very often, where teachers and students are seen as adversaries as opposed to colleagues. Particularly in many urban schools that I have worked with, I found that it's so much easier when everybody feels like they are part of the community and that it's not an us versus them mentality. And that happens because, as I said, everybody wants to belong to some community. So I'm going to move on here, and I'm going to start to draw a line from what we just talked about uh, to something called salutogenic design, which that means is designing for wellness. And if you design for wellness, you're also designing for in a way that supports the self-determination theory. So what does that actually mean, right? So I'm going to ask you this question. If you are talking about design, I'm going to wear your designer's hat on. What can you do as a designer that will enhance autonomy? What kind of steps can you take to make somebody feel that they have that autonomy in the environments that you create? Yeah, choice is a great one, that people don't feel that they are trapped doing only one thing.
Variety, another good one.
Yeah. So it looks like choice is jumping to the top here, which is exactly right, because I think that most of us don't realize that we think in terms of great design, but we don't necessarily think in terms of, well, in what ways are we providing the people who are there to be themselves. We might have done something that we're very proud of, but how well does it serve the people that we are trying to serve? Now, here's a good, I think this is a good opportunity because we hear this so much. We hear choice and we hear flexibility and variety. So I think it's a great opportunity to talk a little bit about the difference between flexibility and variety. Now, flexibility is about spaces that are jack of all trades, master of none, right? A conference center would be a perfect example of that, where it can become a big dining hall and then the partitions go up and it's just a big place in which you can do a bunch of things and put different kinds of furniture. But that has zero ambience. Whereas variety is something that says that just like in your home, you have a variety of spaces and you select the spaces that serve the purpose that you want it to serve. So really, in my perspective, variety trumps flexibility. Because do you really want kids to be moving furniture around all day? Do you go home every day and move your furniture? So why are we expecting kids to do that? So really what I'm saying is that if you have sufficient variety in the space, and we'll actually talk about that a little bit later, then you don't need that much flexibility because the flexibility comes from the variety that you're providing. And it then also gives individuals choices. They can choose rather than make a space flexible. What we're saying is make the students have the freedom, and that's perfect word that just popped up, to make to create the variety, create the flexibility of their own learning. They can then self-select what they want to do.
Somebody wrote here scale, which is also very important to actually allow different age groups of students to have the autonomy in the space.
Exactly. That's a good point, actually, Ronnie, because like, for example, if you're designing a kindergarten space or an early childhood and you have a bin and that bin is so heavy that a child can't pick it up. It's a bin with all her blocks, for example, and she can't pick it up. She's going to have to ask an adult to do that. So even at that level, you want the bin to be small enough that the child can pick it up and move around. So that's autonomy. That enhances autonomy. So encouraging, these are all good words. Some of them seem a little bit on the fringes, but they're perfectly appropriate when you talk about autonomy.
Reconfigurable spaces is also very important, meaning that the space itself
Yeah,
is changing according to the changing needs of the students and the learning community.
yeah,
So buildings are actually are learning buildings, not just something we design and the school uses.
exactly. Yeah. Serendipity is a amazing word there. Becoming part of an ecosystem. Yeah, because you're part of a system, and why should the space not allow you to feel completely um, embraced by that system? Being
Ownership,
asked your needs and opinions, that's an excellent one.
also
Beata.
ownership.
Yeah, exactly. That's an excellent point. Excellent. So we're going to move on. I wish I could sit and just listen to you guys. Okay. So then we're going to do one for each of them. So competence. Some of these are tougher. We didn't say it's going to be easy. How can strategic design enhance competence? What can we as architects, school architects, do to make people feel more competent and more able to do whatever it is they're doing well? That's perfect. Inspiring spaces can be amazing. And actually, Roni is going to be talking a little bit about that. Focus. Absolutely. Yes. Challenging is a good one because what people don't realize is that children don't want us to make things easy for them. They want challenges. If they want to overcome challenges, that's why they like to play in a playground which provides some challenges that they need to overcome. So
Somebody wrote earlier that the design should allow them to take risks.
yeah.
So
Yeah, excellent. It's a funny thing because like in Australia, when they do playgrounds, they don't always put that padding because children do sometimes fall and they do get hurt, but it teaches them to be more careful. But if you're always falling on soft rubber, then you don't know how to fall. Yeah. So, and in Australia also, they basically create bikes without training wheels, uh, and then because that's how you learn, so risk is not a bad point there at all when you talk about competence.
place to display work is also very important.
Yeah. Accessibility. Yeah, comfortable to be self. That's a good point because if you don't feel comfortable in the environment, you're not going to feel very competent. You're going to feel constricted because of the environment that's been created. And also environments, I mean, a good example of this is if you create a classroom with a table at the front of the room and 25 chairs, and you send in 25 kids and an adult, the adult will gravitate to the front of the room and the kids will gravitate to each chair, right? They just assume that this is what they're supposed to do. But if you put a bunch of video games consoles in that room, the adult will be disoriented and the children will just run around trying to play with the different things that are there. So how you furnish that space will decide how competent people are.
Somebody wrote here something very interesting, spaces to honor different types of learning, which is very important because we tend to appreciate certain types of learning. If you want the students to really feel, to have competency, then it needs to have all options open.
Right. Yeah, because schools tend to celebrate one or two ways of learning and one or two kinds of learning. And so people who want to be competent at other skills feel marginalized because those skills that they are good at don't seem that important. So there are so many subtle ways in which we can either facilitate or militate against salutogenic design that supports competence. And then we have, I'm going to move on. This is a very wonderful, wonderful responses. You guys are all awake
All
and
right, and well,
not tuned into the TV.
well, we're just starting to turn the wheel, but the wheels will keep turning
Yeah.
as we move on.
Yeah, reduce environmental stresses. That's a great point, because if you are uncomfortable, or if you are, and Ronnie will touch on this as well, you're not going to be very good at trying to get good at whatever it is that you're doing. You know, connection to nature, perfect. You know, wonderful ideas, really, really good.
Places for exploration.
Yeah, adventure. So, relatedness. This comes to the human connection. What do we do? What can we do
In the
to
design.
in the design that allows people to connect with each other? Yeah, create a heart. Yeah,
Collaboration zones are very important.
right. Bring in
Since
cultural context is a great one. It reminds me of a time in the Maori in New Zealand, who said that we communicate through storytelling. How come you haven't provided enough places for us to tell stories? You know, or the Native Americans here with the kiva, you know, which we have now kind of appropriated as a Western concept. Yeah, someone mentioned kiva there. Yeah, human and student scale. That's a good point, because, for example, if you provide furniture where a teacher is able to walk around and kind of look over a child's shoulder as opposed to be forced to sit next to them, then you can connect with them without encroaching on their autonomy. So these are not separate. When we talk about these three components of self-directed, what is that? Salutogenic learning design, all three components have to be in play. We are not choosing one over the other.
informal space is very important.
Yeah.
We tend to assume that if students are not sitting in a classroom listening to a teacher, they're not learning. But social emotional learning is also very important, and we need to create the environment for that as well.
Right. Yep. Living room. That's a good point. In fact, the space behind me is a entry to one of our schools, and we call that the family room. Great points, guys. So we're going to move on. So here are some of the things that we put down. This was a quick back of the envelope type thing. So I'm not going to read from here, but essentially on the one side, you have the autonomy, and then you say, well, how do I ensure that autonomy happens? So here are a few areas in which we might display autonomy as a designer. obviously legible design. Someone talked about wayfinding earlier, things like that, transparency, predictability, wayfinding, variety of learning spaces, barrier free, obviously. So what are the things we as designers can do to make salutogenic design from from a perspective of autonomy? And similarly, what do we do from the perspective of competence? Um, and competence, again, you can see some words. This is just a few of the words, and you captured most of them. And in fact, you had a lot more than the stuff we talk about here. Remember, we talked about risk, and you guys picked it up there as well. Confidence, feeling of flow. You don't want to be interrupted. Confidence. That's a good point here. So right there, you can see the bell going off every 45 minutes actually goes against the notion of competence, because essentially what we're saying is that anything worth doing is not worth doing well, because nobody wants to be interrupted right in the middle of flow when they're doing something engaging. So again, you can see on the right, how do we design that? And here are some of the components of design from the perspective of a designer. And then finally, talk about relatedness, being part of something larger than oneself, social peer interaction, sense of purpose. That's what relatedness means. And here are some of the things that we are talking about that we can do as designers to ensure that relatedness is possible, and that we are not, as I said, militating against it, but we are actually facilitating relatedness. Ronnie?
This is a great example of all three coming together in this one space. We can see that students has autonomy, they can practice and gain competency, and of course they can feel part of something bigger. And if they want to become part of this community, then this space create the option. So I think this is a great example. Um, I think that the space should actually allow, you've been touching upon this when we were asking you the surveys, you were touching the fact that the space needs to allow many different types of learning. So we listed 20 of them. And again, if we want all these things to happen, then this space should allow the different modalities to occur in this one particular environment. And we would not like the space or the design to limit in any way the learning and the activities that can actually happen in that space.
So here's an example of what Ronnie is just talking about. So here's what we would call a learning community. So this is the antidote to the cells and bells, which is the classroom and corridor model. And so here you have direct instruction spaces, but you also have the opportunity to move very easily into a student-directed mode. And the tremendous variety of opportunities allows students to self-select. So if you talk again about salutogenic design, here's an opportunity. And the teachers have their own workspace as well. So they're working as a team. So they're not isolated. There's space for distance learning, and there's outdoor connections. We talk about nature connections. We have resources that they need right there in their backyard. The critical difference between this and the typical school design is that everything that you need is at your fingertips. You don't have to go to another part of the school. Traditional schools are zoned. There's a library, there's a cafeteria, there's a gymnasium, there's a music room, there's an art room. And it's almost like you have to go to all these different places to do different things. And that's not how human beings are. We naturally want to be able to go grab a coffee. We naturally want to be able to talk to our colleagues. We naturally want to be able to write or read or research. And we want spaces that allow all of these things to happen. And this is what I was meaning earlier about, yes, there's flexibility here, but what's more important here is not the flexibility as much as the variety. And so what we do is when we design these spaces, we test it against the 20 modalities. And we say, okay, let's look at teacher collaboration. Where is that going to happen precisely? Where are all the spaces here where independent study can happen? Have we provided enough spaces for independent study? Have we provided enough spaces for one-on-one learning? If a teacher wants to get away with a student and have an individual coaching lesson, or with 2 or 3 students, if somebody wants to build something, is there a place for them to do that? Is there a place for project-based learning, and so on and so forth? So what we do is we identify how this one area can actually accommodate all 20 modalities. Now, just for comparison purposes, a typical school will comfortably allow maybe 2 or 3 modalities of learning. which is crazy because that means your teachers and students are severely limited in what they can do. It's the exact opposite of celebrogenic design, because essentially, rather than self-determination, we as architects have already determined for them how they should live. And that obviously makes no sense at all. So that brings us to the teacher. So the question is, what happens in for teachers, and what kind of a role would they play? So I want to talk about this. What do you think would be a new role for a teacher? Because they obviously have, I mean, they're no longer the font of all knowledge.
Safety officer, really?
Yeah, that's a great point. Designer, facilitator, counselor. I mean, if in a world where information is so easily available, the teacher's provocateur and counselor becomes very important. Architect is an excellent one. We'll actually talk a little bit about that. So the word facilitator seems to be jumping up here. Yes, it's a conduit and not necessarily be the expert in all situations.
Mentor, advisor,
Yeah, therapist.
partner.
Yeah, but the question I'm going to be getting into a little bit beyond this is, what skills do teachers need to have? I mean, they need to develop some skills. You can't just say, okay, overnight I've been teaching in a particular way for the last 25 years, and tomorrow I'm going to become a new world teacher. You know, there are some specific skills and competencies that teachers need to have, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Virus mitigation specialist. That's a good one. I don't know why you took it off, but I think that's a very important one, because unfortunately a lot of teachers have been put in that role of virus mitigation specialist.
Coach, I've been waiting for that one.
A thought leader who uplifts all students. Critical thinking coach is an excellent one, because if you look at anything in life that you want to become good at, you just have to do it. And you do it better if you have a good coach. But the coach is not the one doing the work. You are doing the work. Media producer, digital presenter. Yeah.
Meaning the teacher is not only somebody who is communicating information, but also producing some content.
Right. Learning experience curator. Yep. These are excellent ideas. Information guide, not the provider, but the person that helps you sift through the information available. This is a great point, because I think right now we've all heard the word fake news, right? So the question is, and in fact, there is a lot of that out there. So the question then becomes, how do you know? In the new world, our students need to be critical thinkers so they can distinguish between what is real and what is not, because they all seem to have the same validity. I mean, you can prove and disprove anything on the internet. I mean, you just put something up and I can find you 50 people who will agree with one side, and then 50 others, experts, who will tell you the exact opposite. So how do you know who's right and who's wrong, right? So that's an important skill that teachers need to teach, or at least be available to do. So okay, so I'm going to move on here. So here's Heidi Hayes Jacobs, a colleague of ours, in her book Bold Moves. She talks about these 6 critical roles of the teacher. Teacher, a self-navigating professional learner, meaning that a teacher is always a learner too. The minute you stop learning, you aren't going to do a job as a teacher as well. So you have to start with the idea that I'm going to be self-navigating. I'm not going to be looking to somebody else. I'm going to, take charge and become a professional learner. Social contractor, meaning that teacher is someone who is going to help you make those connections, social connections, and help you get out of your bubble, so to speak. Media critic, media maker, publisher. Roni was touching upon this earlier, that teacher is not just a passive person. She's not just a consumer of information, but also a producer of original material. Innovative designer of both of the curriculum, as well as whatever it is that the students are working with. her on. Teacher is a globally connected citizen because information is no longer local. Everything is now global, and teacher can connect to colleagues all over the world. And finally, the most important, she or he is the biggest advocate for learners and learning. Because if you think about learners specifically, they don't have the voice that we as adults have, and someone needs to be an advocate for them. And who better to do that than teachers? So in this context, I wanted to tell you that there was an instance where Roni and I were working together on a project in Israel, and I'll let her tell you the story of how we made these six new roles, so to speak, happen.
It's also how we've met.
It's also how we met, right?
So a couple of years back, an Israeli educational net contacted Prakash in order to start change this educational net. Their name is Amit, and they own over 100 schools all over Israel. And after reaching to Prakash, we helped them realize that everything starts with the teachers. And therefore, we decided that the first step should be to create an innovative training center for teachers. And as you can see, they chose a very nice location for that. It looks very innovative. This was the building that they gave us to transform and make it into the teacher training center. A lot of concrete, as you can see, was built in the 70s. These are some of the before and after pictures. This is the entrance to that part of the complex. And as you can see on the plan, it was a typical Sales and Bells school. We only got part of the existing school, one floor actually, with some outdoors area. And what we did was we transformed it into this more, if you'd like, allowing or optional learning community that is actually, it looks like how we would like their schools to look like in the future, meaning that the teacher will be trained in this environment, trying to look like how we would like the future schools to look. And you can see that we took the classrooms and we made them into a much more allowing learning spaces. And one of the interesting things you can see here in the map, that we used the whole area, the indoors, the outdoors, everything is part of this learning community, and everything is referring to their future needs as a training teacher learning community. So this is how it looked like when we started, a typical Sales and Bells school with a corridor and some classrooms, which in this case did not even have windows that you could look out through. And this is what we made of it. We brought more daylight in. We opened up the walls, and you can see the acoustic partition on the left side of this picture. We took care of light, of acoustics and furniture. And as you can see, you can easily rearrange this room for any particular activity at any given moment. Again, this is a before picture and an after picture. The classrooms are gone. The space can become one if we need to accommodate a large group of teachers, but we can also close this glass partition in the back of the picture and have some group working there, still having an eye contact with the rest of the space. And this is Professor Elmore from Howard actually coming to train these teachers. And then every one of these teachers is actually going back to their school and trying to practice everything that they've learned here in this training center. This used to be the Beit Midrash, which is for religious studies, for prayers, and we turned it into a makerspace. The point was to have the teacher have the opportunity to do any kind of hands-on work, exactly like the students. We wanted them to have all resources available at every given time. This used to be the outdoors, and you can see it looks like even almost a military court with the flag in the middle, very exposed. In Israel, if you want to use the outdoors, 10 months a year, what you need, first of all, is shade. So what we added was these shade elements that you can open up or you can close as needed according to the weather. We added a lot of furniture. We added, of course, electricity, light, Wi-Fi. This is a before picture, and this is an after picture. And you can see how the teachers are actually using that as part of their training. it's an extension of the indoor spaces, and it's part of the learning community. It's not just for breakout or for socializing. You can actually do a lot of other things here. This is actually a concrete amphitheater. The picture was taken in one of our earlier visits in this place. And I actually went down the stairs. I was standing down there and I was trying to see what's going on above. And of course, I had no eye contact because it was very low, very down, deep in the ground, like a hole. So this is when I came up with the idea to actually give up the lower steps of this amphitheater and create this deck, if you like, or this surface, which is a lot higher. And now when you're sitting here or standing here, you can have an eye contact and you can see what's going on around you. And it became part of the outdoor area. So ever since we completed this project, we had, I think, over 17,000 teachers coming through this learning community, through this training center, and taking this message on back to their schools. This is a train the trainer project where the teachers are coming here, they get to experience something different, and then they take the message back to their own school and hopefully starting the change, the future change. So with that, Prakash, I'm going to give you back the
Yeah, so I guess the question for all this would finally be, well, so how do we know this thing's working? Because when the world of education, everybody wants proof. Everyone wants to know, how do you know it's working? And this has actually been a big problem in education. In fact, probably one could say it might be the foundation of most of the reasons education's problems start. And that is because we are continuously valuing the things that we can measure instead of measuring the things that we value. So what happens is that education is driven by assessment as opposed to assessment being there to support education. So we have this analogy that we like to use, and one is think about a marathon runner. And it's essentially you don't become a marathon runner overnight, but there's a process that you have to go through. And if you go through that process rigorously every single day, and some people might be better genetically suited to become marathon runners, and others might take much longer. But in the end of the day, if you can put in the effort, then you will eventually become a marathon runner. But if the measure of success is, hey, are you running marathons? Then every single day you're going to wake up saying I failed. So we would tend to change our goals and basically give up on becoming one. So the idea ultimately is that if you want to get good at something, you have to work at it. If you want to become a good critical thinker, you have to do critical thinking throughout your education. If you want to become a problem solver, that's what you need to be doing. So what we began to realize is that we're designing all these great spaces, we're designing all these wonderful schools, but how do we know it's working? Because if the measures are still the examinations and things like that, why would we even bother? Because you don't need the innovative spaces we are designing, which are specifically to develop these soft skills, the salutogenic design, which has nothing to do with exams. I mean, you could put kids in a very uncomfortable environment and force them to memorize stuff and spit it back on an exam. That's not what we're talking about. So what we did is we've developed several tools for teachers and students and for schools and school districts so that they can take all of this learning and basically internalize it. So we don't need to be part of the process. They can self-evaluate, self-regulate, and truly see the connections between the built environment and their ability to be, again, autonomous, be competent, and what's the third one? Have the relatedness. So these are the tools that we've created. So here's, for example, one tool. This is, we call it the Path tool because it talks about creating Pathfinder opportunities in a school, and a Pathfinder is basically like a pilot. But of course, this tool can be used by any teacher in any class. And essentially what we ask the teacher is, when you run your class, now that we've created all these wonderful spaces for you, what would I see if I were a fly on the wall? Would I see independent work happening? Would I see what kids working in small teams? Would I see them using technology? Would I see this work being student-centered? Would I see multiple groupings? Are you going to be a coach? Are you going to let students direct their own learning? And etc. The teacher might say yes to these, and teacher might say no. Or the teacher might say, look, I have a whole bunch of other things I want to put on this list. And we say, no problem. So this list becomes the template for that class. So as you can see, this has nothing to do with exams. This has to do with process. So this is me observing teaching practice, or the teacher herself observing her own practice and saying, am I doing the things as a teacher that I need to do so that my students can develop the skills that they need to develop? So if they are not working in small teams, they're never going to learn how to collaborate. If they're not working independently, they're never going to have autonomy, and on and on and on. So you begin to see what we're talking about. So we've converted this into an app, and this app is now available to a teacher and to a student. And the teacher can, at the end of any class or any block of lesson block, it could be 90 minutes, it could be a half a day, it could be a project, whatever, she can self-regulate and self-assess and say, hey, how am I doing? And if she didn't do well enough, she can change the conditions and redo it. It's an opportunity, a productivity tool for teachers, basically. Now, at the higher level, at the level of the superintendent, at the level of the school principal, you're going to get really great feedback about what is it that is actually happening in the school. I'm not talking about classrooms, because hopefully we've replaced them with learning studios and all the other stuff that we talked about. And now you begin to see, wow, a lot of my what's happening in school is self-directed. Wow, a lot of what's happening is teacher being a coach, or that kids are learning to work in small teams. So now I can predict that students will actually be good at the things that I want them to be good at, because guess what, they're practicing it. And I don't have to guess. I don't have to come back 6 months after to do a post occupancy evaluation and say, oh yeah, you're doing this and you're not doing that, because that's a moment in time, that's a snapshot in time. And I wanted, Roni and I, we wanted tools that people can use continuously and continuously improve access to their space.
It's very important to say it's a self-evaluation. So you set the bar
Yeah.
and you check the results, and you can change that any given time. And the information is anonymously can be held in the system, so others can actually have a full picture of a certain school.
Yeah, I want to say that this and other tools that I'm demonstrating here, if you are an educator in particular and you want a demo of it, and this is completely free, we're happy to demonstrate it to you and give you access to it as well. So this is what the app would look like on the phone. And here's what, when you finish a lesson, here's what you would get. You'd get a score, and you'd also get a report. You can even have it printed as a PDF if you want. But essentially, it takes 15 to 20 seconds to complete an evaluation of a particular class if you are self-assessing. Now we have an even more exciting app that we've just developed. And this one actually maps schools as designers, as we're designing. Remember, I talked about self-genic design, and we're essentially designing it, and then we're testing it. We're running simulations. We're bringing in teachers, and we're asking them, well, what are you going to be doing Tuesday afternoon? Let's see in the particular lesson that you guys have planned, what students are precisely going to be doing and where are they going to be. And then we map all of these different rooms based upon what they're capable of doing and what they are ideally suited to do, and how many students can be held in any particular space at any particular time. So this is an opportunity to look at the efficiency and utilization of buildings, but at the same time, more importantly, it's an opportunity to see in real world. Now the picture on the right is, if in the real world, once a building has been built, students and teachers have this app on their phones. And essentially, they can just do an audit at any minute and any time during the day and say, well, let's see what's actually happening. So they quietly walk around the space, and then they record what is happening and where it is happening. Now you compare that with the design, and you begin to see whether or not the design building is being used in the way it was intended to be used. And if it's not being used in that way, it's a perfect opportunity for a principal to say, hey, look, we paid a lot of money for that great common space that looks like nobody's using it. Why don't you guys use it instead of all being squeezed into that little conference room, which everybody seems to be trapped in? It also tells you what modalities of learning are actually happening. So the principal can look at it and say, wow, over the last month, it looks like our school is definitely moving more in a student-centered direction. I see very little direct instruction happening. I see a lot more team collaboration. I see a lot of research. I see a lot of distance learning, and on and on and on. So now you're beginning to connect the hardware, which is what we're designing, with the software, which is what happens with educators. And this is happening in real time. So you can make the changes when needed, as needed. So we're really excited to take all of our thinking and begin to say, well, kind of hold our own feet to the fire and say, we're giving you tools to tell you whether or not what we've done for you, designed for you, actually works in the context that you want to make it work.
Again, one of the things we said earlier is that good design is a design that allows the building to change according to the changing needs of the community with time. So this tool is also allowing you to follow up these changes and to see if some spaces are being used more or being underutilized, and then you can make those changes according to the real needs of this community.
So like I said, this app is available as both in the iOS as well as Android phones, and it's very, very easy to use. And again, these audits can be completed within a matter of minutes. So here is an example of a space that we converted. And as you can see, that app would be perfect to go out here and quietly monitor what's happening and see if the design use of the space matches the way spaces are actually being used at any given point in time. This was a typical Charles and Bell school that we converted into a learning community.
In New Delhi,
Yeah.
India.
So I'm going to have Roni talk a little bit about design patterns, because there are certain things that are universal, and we want to see what kind of those universal patterns are there that we can use for salutogenic design. And so I'm going to let her take it from here.
Okay, so basically when we talk about how buildings and this environment is impacting learning, we're talking about four different ways. The first is the physical, means everything that impacts our well-being, whether we're talking about fresh air, temperature, or light. You can see in this picture, for instance, that there's a lot of daylight coming in. We can see different kinds of furnitures, hard, soft, different options to sit and work, formal, non-formal. It's very important to create some breakout spaces. So this is about the physical impact of the space. The other one, the second one, is the psychological. It's how we feel in the space. And that has more to do with a certain ambience, a certain atmosphere that the design is creating. This is one example. And another example, completely different ambience. The third is practical, and this has to do with what Prakash was mentioning earlier. This is about what we can actually do in the space. So if we want the students to practice collaborative work, to be able to do some research or anything else, the space should allow that. And again, here are a few examples: an art studio, or a maker space. When you walk into this room, you can immediately imagine all the things that you can actually do in this space. All options are open. Or this wonderful space, which combines different arts with music and allowing all this to happen in this one space. The fourth way that the building or the physical environment is impacting learning is the behavioral, meaning how the space is affecting us to or our behavior. So it can be an inspiring space, or if we look at this space, for instance, there's a very high ceiling. It's a very high space, so it might be good for high level thinking, for big thoughts. But if we want to focus, we might actually enter that room in the back of this space, or a space like this. What kind of behavior it encourages? So the important thing is, and this is, you can read more about this in our book, The Language of School Design, is to remember that design is also about communication. And what we need is to create a common language between the architecture and the education or the educators. We need to have that language in order to create the dialogue, which will result, the design, like Prakash said, the hardware that will fit the software, meaning we need to know what kind of school you want us to design. We need to have that dialogue, and then we'll design the school according to the specific needs of this learning community. And it's very important. We were talking before about students' autonomy. So we want to have their voice in the process as well. So I'm going to show here a couple of design patterns. Our mind is set to, put things in order, especially when we're relating to a physical space, to buildings. And some of these patterns are actually universal. I'm sure you're all familiar with the examples I'm about to show, at least some of them. And when I'm done, you can see that the list is long and you could add more and more patterns. So this is the first one I'm going to show is welcoming entry. Of course, every school would like to have that welcoming entry. It can have different interpretations, different kinds of spaces, whether it's a high school or the school that Prakash was showing earlier, or this example can have different interpretations. Cells and bells is also a pattern. When we're talking about identical classrooms on the two sides of a corridor, this is a very clear pattern. This is how most typical schools looks like. And I'm sure if I would have shown you this picture, for example, you couldn't tell in which part of the world we actually took that picture, because schools look alike everywhere, all around the world, unfortunately. So one of the first small changes we can start doing without a lot of effort is to actually turn a pair of classrooms into what we call a learning suite. If we just replace the wall between the two classrooms with a movable wall, a screen, or some piece of furniture. And this allows these teachers and the groups of students to actually work together, to collaborate. Students can use different parts of the space for different purposes, as we've seen, and of course, have their own outdoor connection from the classroom outside. This is an example. You can see the opening petition. You can see how students are using this whole space. Or this is even a better example. We see younger students using the different parts of the space for different purposes, doing different things at the same time. And every part of the space is designed for a different purpose. Transparency is also very important. We were talking about students' autonomy and collaborating and creating a community. So transparency is one of the patterns that actually allows that, because if we can have an eye contact, even if we're in one space and we can have that eye contact with another space, we are actually part of what's going on. And another thing, it's making learning visible. So if somebody's walking into our learning community, he's already part of what's happening. You can see what's going on in the different spaces. And of course, transparency also allows to bring more daylight from outdoors into the interior spaces. That's natural ventilation, also very, very important. We're not just talking about temperature, we're talking about bringing in some fresh air, which has a direct impact on our cognitive abilities. And for that, we might want to use not just the building, but also some transformation areas between indoors and outdoors. Even in very hot and humid climates, you can see in the picture, we're using some fans here, and we're creating the opportunities for students to work in the fresh air. Casual eating areas, again, we're not just talking about one purpose for a space. What we would like these areas to look like is more like a cafe, where you can eat, but you can also socialize. You can also do collaborative work or work on projects. No reason why they shouldn't look like this, or using the outdoors for the same purposes. Exterior views from inside out, very important. Research actually shows that if students are looking at greenery while they're working, while they're studying, again, their cognitive abilities are rising. They will do better. And if you have beautiful view like this example from Boulder, Colorado, then why not enjoy it? And this is the major space of the central space of the school. And students can actually do all kinds of things here, looking outside and enjoy the beautiful view. Outdoor learning became a very important issue, especially in the COVID crisis times. Of course, we need to have the distance, social distance, but it also creates an opportunity for different curriculum, for doing things that we couldn't do inside, whether we're talking about planting trees. It includes, of course, the physical activity, enjoying the fresh air and the sunlight again, doing some field research, completely different type of research than in the lab. Why not use the outdoors for that? And of course, have some fun.
That's great. Thank you, Roni. So go back to the previous picture.
Okay.
Previous. Okay, I'll do it. Yeah, so basically, as Ronnie was saying, this is all available in this pattern language for schools, which is language of school design. It's been now in its fourth printing already. And those of you who are interested, we're happy to give you a free electronic copy of the book. So just send us an email and we'll be happy to send it to you. So basically, our experience over the years has been that as we work with schools, these themes seem to pop up. One is that we want schools to be personal and not just personalized, meaning that everybody needs to feel that they as an individual is being celebrated, not just that we are creating opportunities for them, but that they become anonymous. And then the collaborative is becoming much more the word keyword as opposed to competitive. Three is that we want students to have many opportunities to solve problems, because becoming a problem solver is an essential life skill. And same thing with creativity. I mean, these are nice words, but they would be empty words if they weren't actually implemented. That's why we showed you earlier the tools that we've developed to actually measure some of these things and to see to what extent our students actually engaging in opportunities for solving problems and to exercise their own creativity. But the reason why all of this is harder to do is because we started with learning spaces because, hey, we said, as I said, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So we said, wow, we are hugely influential, so let us do our part with learning spaces. But we realized that it was an important piece of the puzzle, but was still only a piece of the puzzle. So we said, okay, well, let's make sure that we work with curriculum experts who then also would have to work with scheduling to make sure that there's a new curriculum and a new schedule that will take full advantage of these innovative learning spaces we're creating. But then we realized, well, that's not enough unless you do professional development. And Roni touched upon this earlier about why professional development is critical. So we brought that into the picture. And then we finally found, well, all of that is great, but if the people in charge, the governance, the operation, the communication with the community, the parent expectations, college expectations, all of these things aren't dealt with, is still going to fail. So really all four of these pieces have to come together, and it's at the nexus of these four pieces that real transformation happens. And that's the reason it's so tough to change education. It's not that people don't realize, I mean, nothing that we said today is controversial. It's exceptionally common sense, but change is still very difficult. And that's the reason we felt that it has to be a process. And hopefully over the last 20 years, we managed to bring it down to kind of like a science, and that's what we've been trying to do. So as you can see, all of our work is done collaboratively. This is pre-COVID, as you can see, and hopefully post-COVID as well. So here's teachers, given the autonomy and given the freedom and competence, you can see they're designing their own spaces. And very often they basically are the igniters of all the ideas that we come up with. So I wanted to sort of conclude this with a little video. I hopefully it'll play there. How a simple space can be transformed to create a salutogenic design. So here's an example. I'm going to run the animation, and in the chat window, you can say if any of this stuff is not visible to you guys, and I'll just stop it. So essentially, this was in Hawaii, and essentially there were 3 classrooms, essentially, and a couple of offices that we transformed into a learning community. So we'll show you how we did this. You see, basically what we had was 3 classrooms, an outdoor hallway. And so we immediately took that outdoor hallway, made it part of our learning community, and created the new model, if you will. And so essentially we created a cave space for independent study, a media place, learning studios, the learning suite that we talked about earlier. We created a commons area where the socializing can happen. Let's see what else was there. And we created Da Vinci Studio, which is a hands-on work area to do projects and various hands-on activities. We created a patio outside. We created a reflection terrace where people can think for themselves, a rainwater garden, a collaboration space for teachers. And of course, you can see all the connections between all these different spaces happening at the same time. Now, if you wanted to take a tour through that, this sort of a temporary type structure almost was what covered that existing patio that was out there. And then once you go into the space, it's kind of like, if you think about it, like a day in the life of a student. So you can see this is non-air conditioned space here with a big fan. And then the schedule is available right there, what's going to happen during the day. you put all of that up, and then from there you start going into the space. Now remember, we were dealing with 3 classrooms and a few common spaces associated with it. So typical classroom type space, we call them learning studios because they're very agile. They can transform very quickly. And Roni showed you how learning suites are very effective. So we can either make them permanent learning suites, or we can have the partition between them. And then the learning suites themselves connect to commons areas outside, again, with furniture that's mobile, though not necessary to move them with all the variety that we have here. So we have student-led presentations here. As you can see, a lot of connections to the outside. And here's a small reflection terrace where you can get away from everybody and sort of be on your own. So we need that, in a time when we are buffeted with information. It's good to have places like that. And then you come to the active places where you're doing your projects. And, here is an example of one such project. And then you have these garage doors that can open up to the project room, which in turn leads to the rest of the school. So as you can see, we can create design that allows the self-determination theory to be successful. And that goes not just for the students, but for the teachers as well. And especially in a place like Hawaii, of course, there's no excuse for not connecting to the outside. So we have lots and lots of outdoor connections, and a media bar here, which is kind of like an Apple store, so to speak, So again, it's a place for collaboration. It's a place for independent study. It's a place for research, but professional looking spaces. And you can create independent study spaces without creating full rooms. Here we call it the cove, and you can see just a few people sitting in a little sheltered space creates that opportunity. And then finally, we have the teacher collaboration space, which is very important because we want teachers to be able to work in teams. And the salutogenic design is as much for the teachers as it is for the adults, for the kids, for the students. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I think that we have time to take questions. So let's stop the presentation here. And
It's important to say that the science project in the animation had nothing to do with the election results.
no, no, it didn't. So here we are. I guess.
So feel free to type any questions.
Or maybe you can even be unmuted, and I can send you answers to the technical questions. Just email us.
Yeah, but if you have any questions about the presentation and the things we just brought up, please feel free to type it into the Q&A box, and we will be reading it online and relating. So
I'm just typing in my email address.
okay.
And I think, as I said, that you can be unmuted. Our facilitators could do that, and you can be on camera, and you can ask a question if anybody is brave enough to do that. I don't see why you shouldn't be.
There's a question about classrooms in the learning communities.
Yeah.
In the chat.
Yeah.
You might want to address.
What's the question?
Go to the chat.
When you convert these traditional classrooms in a community and then working together to suit their needs? Was the question? When you convert these traditional classrooms, are all the classes then a community and then working together to suit their needs? Basically, when we convert classrooms, we are basically working on the software and the hardware at the same time. We're saying that you don't realize it, but your lessons and your classes have been severely impacted by what we as architects have allowed you to do. So when we are redesigning the spaces, we're also redesigning the pedagogy and the professional development and the curriculum. So all of these things are happening at the same time. So that's how we do that.
There's a question here about security.
Yeah, security is a good question. The reality is that we've been challenged multiple times on it, and interestingly, in every single case, the professionals who have looked at our design have found it to be far safer than a traditional school design. So let me be specific, because I think that it's a big thing on people's minds. So what happens is you can create zones. So a learning community can be a zone with literally a bulletproof door, And now everybody in that community is completely safe. Whereas in the traditional model, you had to secure each and every single classroom. And even if you did that, how hard is it to blow through a typical classroom door? So you have, people are sitting ducks. In our buildings, people can get out easily. Transparency allows a gunman to become visible. So we want to be aware of security, but we don't want it to become something that forces us to create prisons.
There's a question here about acoustics. So first I want to emphasize that when we think about acoustics, or we were showing you the learning communities and all these variety of spaces, and people still think that in order to learn, we need to have silence, because we are used to frontal teaching where one teacher is speaking to a group of students, and therefore if there's not going to be silence, they cannot hear him. And it's also a question of control. But when we're looking at a learning community, it's more about students being engaged. So that's the first thing. When students are being engaged and every area or every part of the learning community is designed specifically for a certain activity, then the problem is smaller, because we have bigger spaces, smaller spaces, we have quiet areas. And of course, we do put a lot of focus on acoustics. Yes, it's a whole science. So what we're doing is we're treating, of course, the ceilings, we're treating the floor with some soft materials and soft furniture also that absorb some of that noise. But we adjust the level of acoustics of each and every part of the learning community, every space within the learning community, to the kind of activity that needs to happen there. So if it's a big common space, we don't need that to be silenced. Just imagine a hotel lobby, or imagine a Starbucks cafe. People are sitting there, they're having a chat, they're working with their computers or doing something on their phone. They don't need the whole environment to be quiet around them. So it depends on what you're doing. Different types of spaces is not just about geometry or size, it's also about the acoustics. Prakash, are there more questions you
About the
want to?
teacher's perspective, I think that the key is that teachers need to be given the support and the professional development. And the interesting thing is teachers have usually felt very isolated in the traditional school. They shut the door and there they are with a bunch of kids. Here they have a group of their own peers supporting them. And teaching is one of the most loneliest professions because of the way it's been. And so what we find is that when we create these communities, teachers have colleagues that they talk to all the time. And so professional development is actually happening, every single day of the school year. They don't have to go away somewhere to get trained. They don't have to go attend a conference to get professional development. And by the way, there's research that shows that when teachers collaborate with each other, that's the absolute best kind of professional development from the perspective of student achievement. So that's one of the reasons we talk about this.
There's a question here whether we have research to support the fact that we claim that a variety of spaces is actually better than the cells and bells model.
Yeah, I'm just typing in my email address again.
So I want to say that everything that our whole design is basically research-based. And yes, we also have our own research. What we've been showing you is the digital tool, but prior to that, we used to run surveys among teachers that went through this change from cells and bells model to a learning community. One of the examples would be Boulder, Colorado, where we did a bunch of schools and we let teachers answer surveys. And the results are showing that the change has made a huge impact on students' achievements and also about teachers' practice. And everybody actually felt that they're doing a better job after this change. Prakash, you want to add something?
Well, let me talk. I was just giving my email address. Then Syria space. How do I get back? 1 second. I'm trying to address questions that. What type of PD do you suggest to engage educators in embracing the concept of letting go of ownership of their space? That's a great question, because the reality is that teachers have a feeling that if you go to a learning community, you're losing a classroom. So one of the first things that they become aware of is we are not losing a classroom, we are gaining a community. It's a big difference. So it's the same as if you now have the variety of spaces in which you can conduct your lesson. Lessons can become that much richer than they would be had you been trapped in your classroom. And we're showing you how the lessons can be so much more interesting for you and for your students. Whenever we've talked to teachers after the fact, we've always found that nobody ever wants to go back to the typical classroom again once they have been here. We're not talking about getting rid of direct instruction. We're not talking about the open schools of the 1970s. I want to make that very clear. As we saw in our plans, there are a number of closed rooms as well, which also get back to the acoustics issue. So we're designing spaces acoustically to be appropriate for the learning activity that's happening there. But we're just creating a variety of opportunities and giving teachers a much, much larger palette to work with.
Okay, so we have questions here about the DaVinci Studio and the makers. And also, so yes, the DaVinci Studio is pretty much for any hands-on work. And there is also a question about when we're converting traditional classrooms type of school to a learning community. So the question is how is that changing the teacher practice, or is that following their needs?
Yeah, let me just touch briefly on the DaVinci Studio. We call it DaVinci Studio because DaVinci was a multidisciplinarian. So we don't want this notion that physical activity and building things and doing things is only for science or maker spaces. What we are saying is that an English teacher should be able to create an activity that's interesting enough that you want to go and do something with it, build something, So we wanted to create a space that is not just for teachers, but not just for science, but for every kind of learning activity. That's one of the reasons we're there. What was the other thing you said, Ron?
Another question here is about students' role in the design process.
Yeah, the students obviously are critical, and we showed you a picture of that. So I think that it's very, very important for students to be consulted at the very beginning. And reality is that these spaces, when we design them, they're not designed to be static. It means that the students are taking charge of it. They become their owners or owners of that space. And if you were to go back a week, 2 weeks, a month later, you want the space to look different. You want the users to have the opportunity to sort of be the architects of their own space. So we tend to under-design our spaces so that there's tremendous opportunities for students to do that. Roni and I actually were in one of our schools that we designed 7 or 8 years ago, and I couldn't recognize it when we went back. And I was very happy to see that there was no construction done during that time period. All the changes that you see happened with no construction. And that's what we talked earlier about learning buildings, where the occupants have the opportunity to transform their own space according to the way they want it to be.
So I see a lot of people are interested to hear more about the process of converting a typical sales and Bell schools to learning community model from the perspective of teacher training, and also people are asking about efficiency and financial perspective and staging.
Yeah, so I'll tell you quickly about that. Basically, what we do is we don't try to ever go into a school or school district and try to make across the board changes. This is not going to be possible. We can't make across the board changes. So what because obviously if you've been doing business in one way, you don't do overnight suddenly turn around and become somebody completely different, right? So we start with something called pathfinders, and some of the tools we have created are also intended for that. So the pathfinders basically are small, very small pilots, if you will, that might involve 3 classrooms or 4 classrooms. And we try to get these things done over a summer. Now, in that Pathfinder, we ask for volunteers, and often we give these volunteers names. We call them innovation fellows. And sometimes we even give them a stipend and pay them a little extra. And those 3 or 4 or 5 teachers who are willing to be the risk takers, if you will, and adventurous, they then come onto the scene, and we provide them with all the support that they need, making sure that they have autonomy and that they are doing the hard work themselves. And then we are able to have 2 parallel processes running side by side, these pathfinders and the regular school, so to speak. And we have all kinds of measures of success built into that. So we can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that this new model works. And then the other teachers can see with their own eyes how these pathfinder spaces are working. And more often than not, we get to ask, well, why am I not part of that pilot? When can I get to do that? And so we do this by creating internal demand within the schools rather than try to force teachers to change. The difference between sales and marketing. Sales is when you try to force someone to buy something, and marketing is when they come to you and ask for it. So our pathfinders actually help people realize what's good, and then they come and ask for it. So this is a process, obviously, and as I said, change isn't easy, but doing it through this. And by the way, it's very inexpensive. We can usually do these pathfinders over a summer, in a few weeks, and be done for very, very small amounts of money as well.
There's a question here about what kind of PD we suggest to engage educators to embrace this concept and let go of the ownership of their own space.
Right. That's what I was talking about earlier. How basically, instead of looking at a classroom as your space, you look at the community as your space. So you talk about the density. This is a good question because most people don't realize that traditional school buildings are very inefficient. You might look efficient, but they really aren't. From the perspective of from the perspective of the user, normally, I mean, at least when I was working in New York City, our public schools were 65% efficient. What that meant is that 35% of the space was used for non-teaching and learning. I'm talking about hallways and janitor's closets, stairwells, toilets, things like that. But the kind of design we are talking about, when you go away from the cells and bells model, you can increase the efficiency. Recently, we did a school. In fact, it was a school that Roni and I worked on. The efficiency of that building was 86%. What that means is that we are capturing 20% more space from the same volume of built area. That's a tremendous amount of space that we are giving back to the school. Obviously, our ideas would have no relevance or meaning if we were doing things that were so much more expensive. So we have to find ways to make these changes palatable from the perspective of money as well.
So I think we can wrap things up.
Yeah.
You want to go back to the last slide of our presentation? There's an interesting concept that we might want to end this presentation and leave you with.
One second. I think that says thank you. That's interesting concept. Let me stop the share and then go back.
No, slide not so important. We can just
Yeah.
share the idea.
Yeah, we don't need a slide.
Yeah.
Share the idea. Yeah, here it is. But, so since we talked about it, we might want to show the people.
We won't keep you curious.
Yeah.
You have enough tension as it is, so
Right.
we'll let you go back to it as.
Yeah. Is this what you were talking about, Ronnie?
Yeah, show me. Yep. So.
You want to say something? You brought it up.
Okay, so if it's up to me, I would say something that I've learned as a parent, not necessarily as a designer. When I gave birth to my first son, somebody came to visit me, an old friend of the family, a woman, and she was holding the baby, and she said, put your mind or make sure that you do not spoil, because every baby that is born into this world is a full world, is a complete and perfect creature, and children and every human being is born with natural curiosity and with the ability to learn. And when we put them through the education system, the one thing I think that we should keep in mind is just not destroy, just not spoil their passion, their curiosity, their natural ability to learn. A lot of you were using the word facilitate when we were asking you earlier about the teacher role, and if you'd like, maybe even the school role. So I think we can all end with this concept that every child is this very delicate plant, and we need to nurture and to water it and to take care and give it the right conditions, to make sure that the environment is allowing it to grow. So when we're talking about education, you again were pointing it out that it's all about creating the right opportunities, maybe asking the right questions, and allow children to thrive. And with this, I think we could we could end,
Yes,
Prakash.
yes.
Anything else you'd like to add?
No, and all of you feel free to write to us, and hopefully we can continue to talk. I mean, A4LE is I mean, it's it's an organization I've been part of in very, very long time. First place actually that gave me an opportunity to share my thoughts and ideas, and I've learned a lot from my friends at A4LE. So I'm really honored that Roni and I could talk to you. And with that, we'll actually let you go back to your the news that you might have been missing, the half hour of repetitive stuff that we've been hearing. So
Thank
anyway,
you all for
thank you.
taking the time and joining us.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.